We're with Professor and Playwright Bob Duxbury. You have seen his work hither and yon all throughout Santa Rosa. And particularly, you may have seen him performing his shtick as a professor at the Santa Rosa Junior College. Bob, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thank you.
So, playwriting. What brought you to that?
I think, first of all, the elimination of other possibilities would be the best way to describe it.
You'd have to go down a really long list before you get to playwriting.
Well, I meant in terms of writing itself. That I found that when I sat down to write, I could write an expository essay, but I didn't really want to be an essayist.
Right.
And I tried to write a novel, and that was really atrocious. Yeah. And then my poems are, short. That's its main sort of merit. And then I also found that I enjoyed arguing with myself. And I mean, Yeats says that the argument with ourselves is poetry, but the argument with ourselves can also be playwriting. And to have, say, two people taking different points of view on a particular topic and then trying to be witty and entertaining and allow people to sit through this and not fall asleep whilst they're watching it was a challenge, and I enjoyed doing that very much. And I was also fortunate to have supportive people in Sonoma County who were interested in theatre particularly, and encouraged me and even put some of my plays on, which was good.
Now which was marvelous. And you are not originally from Sonoma County. You have an accent, Marin?
Yes. No, much further north, Mendocino. Okay. Yeah.
Mendocino.
I'm from Lancashire, Blackburn, Lancashire, in the north of England, and I grew up there. And then I went to Leicester University and then the University of Wales. And then I got a Fulbright exchange scholarship to Santa Rosa in 1980, and hence, from being part of the solution, I'm now the problem.
Right.
So.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Why can't you go back? Is there something criminal background?
It's too deep to actually talk into.
But you've been an instructor locally pretty much from that moment on.
Only for 35 years.
But that's extraordinary. I mean, that really shows dedication to what your passion is.
Well, I think the other honest answer is that once you get tenure once, you're not going to fool anybody twice. Right. So, but all seriousness, I really enjoyed teaching at the JC. I found the students and the sort of needs of the students to be the things that I was interested in addressing.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed sharing literature with people who wouldn't normally have access to the kinds of literature we were talking about unless they go to a community college and unless they are given an opportunity to be exposed to it.
Do you relate to them? Do you see yourself in your students?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Yes, I mean, very much so.
And creatively too. I mean, do you see budding playwrights as well? Or?
Well, there are one or two of my students. Mark Bojanowski is an example, who's actually doing quite well now. He's been published in Granta magazine, and he was one of my former students, and now also actually teaches at the JC. So I have proteges out there.
So the cycle of abuse continues. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. I passed on the blow.
When you began writing plays and you began to find your footing and all that, what were some of the issues you first explored? I mean, obviously you're witty. I mean, were you always going for comedy, or what?
Well, I mean, the awful thing is, of course, when you once written a tragedy and everybody says, "Gosh, that was funny," that was, that's not necessarily what you were aiming at, But the notion of witty conversation and so on is part of the English tradition. And,
I was going to say, yeah.
And I would also say that the theatre in England plays a far more central role in the culture than it does over here. That when I was back recently in England last month, and there are profiles in all the Sunday papers of the playwrights and what they've written and who they are and so on and so forth. And like somebody like David Hare is expected to pontificate upon his particular view of the political situation and so on and so forth. And my plays, if I have to say what they're about, are about today. They're about how do people live in a society that is changing completely. It was somehow useful, I think, to start off in one country and with one culture and then go to a completely different culture with a different set of mores.
Right.
And then the unfortunate thing that for many people who thought that everything was going to be the same is that everybody does that. That the people who've remained in England are saying, I don't recognise this England. The people who live in Sonoma, you yourself are from Petaluma, right. And the Petaluma of 30 years ago is a very different place than Absolutely. The Petaluma of today. And I think that the main subject for everybody's life, in my own humble opinion, is change and how we react to change. And I think that successful people are either swept along with the flood and succeed, or frequently people try to sort of reverse the clock. You could argue about what the Republicans are doing at the moment in their debates, and to say, no, we want to have everything the way it was back in the day when they actually probably weren't adults at that time, and there's this sort of nostalgia.
Right.
Yogi Berra says nostalgia is great, but it wasn't what it was. I mean, it's,
Well, that's a great theme. I'm glad you have a guiding theme that's
Sure.
brought you through much of your work. And yeah, change is happening constantly. Like we're physically falling apart in this moment. At least I am right now. Right? But how does your take on change affect perhaps your views on posterity? Do you worry about that as a writer? How you're going to be thought about in future generations?
Oh, I think that everybody will be forgotten.
Right.
And everything will be forgotten.
And then rediscovered, and then forgotten again.
Well, or not. I
Right,
mean, there's a famous remark about, I don't know who made it, said that everybody used to talk about Shakespeare, but not that much.
Right.
and if Shakespeare is not really on the screen and not that much talked about,
right.
I think if you sit down and think, oh, posterity, I would be quite happy for enormous amounts of wealth and fame in the next 15 to 25 minutes. That would be fine. So.
And so, okay, so when you're workshopping a play, like what is your creative process? I mean, do you begin with a notion and you write it? How do you draft it?
Well, I would say, and I'm speaking to somebody who is a novelist and who sees something on the page as finished. Mm-hmm. And I would say that the analogy I would give you would be a score for a composer,
okay,
or an architect and her building plan.
Surely, yeah.
And so what I do is I go in with when I'm fortunate enough to have a play developed, and an example of this was in River Theatre in Sacramento, did one of mine. And what I did was I went in with the script, and then there was a read through first of all. So I've basically. This is a new work. This was a brand new work that I wrote at that time. Okay. Yeah, and the subject matter of the play, it's called Blame, was about the investigative journalism that goes on television.
Okay.
And I had a friend of a friend who was investigated this way, and eventually, under the pressure of this, committed suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh my God. Okay.
Because that gotcha moment had done it. So that was the impetus of the play, and I wrote the play and dedicated the play to the person who was the protagonist of the play. And then, of course, what happens inside the rehearsal is that the director, who is essentially a co-creator, says this particular scene doesn't work or that scene does, and then actors can, because they are actors, and if they're good actors, can communicate with a huge script that I've actually explained everything, and they go, yeah, and then you think, yeah, okay, that's all it needs. Famous example is David Mamet. Apparently had something like 3 hours worth of play for the Glen Ross, and ended up with 80 pages. So that was, but and that is essentially the process, I think, for all writers. I mean, Somerset Maugham says, if you need any advice, cross it out.
There we go. Well, we'll come back to that in a second. We're with Bob Duxbury, Playwright, and we'll return in a moment.
When I was 6, I had one thing on my mind. When I was 6, my days were spent playing basketball every chance I could. When I was 6, my dream was to make it to the NBA. When I was 6, my mom had a stroke.
I'm Paul George, and I want you to learn the signs of a stroke fast. F-A-S-T.
F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. Because the sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. And that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery.
Protect the ones you love.
Spot a stroke. F-A-S-T. Fast.
We're with Playwright and Professor Bob Duxbury. We left off in our last segment talking about your creative process, and you raised a point that I hadn't actually considered much, which is with prose, it's done on the page, but with plays and screenplays or anything that's sort of not that is a means to an end, not the end itself, there is this collaborative process that occurs. You mentioned how a good actor can, with the nod of a head or a harumph, like erase passages of explication. When that happens, how do you manage that, and what happens to those pages?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the marvelous things about being a playwright and an experience that if you don't like doing this, you shouldn't be one, is to go into a darkened room and then everybody that's saying everything, you've said everything, you've made them say it.
Right.
You know? And I think that's why I do it. That's what I love about it. That's what's so thrilling. And it's essentially like being Dr. Frankenstein, that you spend all this time in the lab, and then all of a sudden this monster comes to life.
Right.
And then at a certain stage it becomes something else. It becomes not yours. It's got to walk around, talk, act and behave, and also be subject. I've had one of my plays was given two different productions. One was in California, one was in New York, and it was fascinating to go to the New York one, which was happened afterwards, and to see how completely different the approach was of the director and of the cast and so on in New York as opposed to in California, and yet it was the same play that I had written.
Let's talk a little bit about that difference and how a work like a play is necessarily interpreted.
Sure.
Like, was it like catastrophically different, or was it just the
No,
contrast? Yeah.
I think it was that the lighting was very California lighting.
Right.
In New York, they had not been to California and didn't understand that our light is a painter's light, different from California's light. And I think also nuance that the New York actors were the cast was much more professional, and they were further advanced than the cast I'd had in California, and were equity and so on. And they brought things to it from their own experience that was their contribution to something that was not my own, but improved my own work. I mean,
Well, let's talk about that, the actor's contribution and what occurs there.
Sure.
Do you anticipate, I'm sure you've written for certain actors before in your
Sure.
but when you're putting lines down, do you hear somebody, or do you have a sort of platonic ideal of what that line should be? Or
in some cases, I write for an actor who I know and who I work with.
Right.
Eric Thompson, who works at the JC as well, is a very good actor.
He's a great actor. I know. Yeah.
I've worked with Eric a lot, and I know that Eric will be able to do this. You know.
Yeah.
And also at the moment, Elliot is just working on a monologue of mine, which we're sending back and forth.
Which Elliot?
Elliot Fintershaw.
Oh yeah, he's great too. Yeah.
So, but I would say that in general, I try to write what I think is the character, and the character has to talk to you and has to say things that the character, you're almost sometimes surprised that the character says that. And the line is, if there's no surprise for the author, there's no surprise for the reader.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing I would say about, if anybody is watching this who is an aspiring playwright, is that there's a notion, certainly among young writers, that dialogue is simply two people saying, oh, yes, oh, no, well, yes, you know.
Because the audience should know is that this has been entirely scripted by Bob. What we're
Yes,
doing now
absolutely.
is actually
Yes, absolutely. But the notion somehow that you don't use something called dramatic dialogue is that when you're actually doing exposition as a writer, you have to put information in there. And of course, no way of doing this without using dialogue. So when you start to write dialogue and dramatic dialogue, you have to say things like, only yesterday you told Mum this, and I specifically told you that you were not to mention about the money under the bed.
Right.
And this is the beginning of when one starts to write plays, that this is the sort of thing that hasn't dawned upon you in your first 15 plays, that in actual fact you have to let the audience in on things. And then these revelations have to come at certain moments. And of course, one would hope that one has an arc and that somebody changes. And just to address the issue of what we talked about earlier about change, is that on the one level, society changes and people do change and times change, but it's very difficult in a 90-minute arc, which is what most modern plays are, to move from point A to point B and make it believable that people would in fact stop being the kind of person they were at the beginning of the play to be the kind of person at the end of the play. I think that Beatrix and Benedict, I'll never marry, and then at the end of the play they get married.
Right.
It's a good play because we believe that they would.
And yet, And yet, sometimes plays don't have that kind of arc.
And
You know,
that's
the entire oeuvre of Beckett comes to mind.
Yes,
you know?
exactly. And that's of course, but in another level, that's sort of more realistic because I think very few people do make these enormous changes at the last minute. Many people remain who they are, and either if they were fortunate, they were born ahead of their time, and then they become in their own time, right? Or if most of us are created by the Weltschmerz of the time,
right.
and then of course it's hard going in the latter stages.
Are plays relevant?
I think they're absolutely enormously relevant. I mean, one of the sadnesses, I think, is that people don't understand the origin of so much that is already enjoyed.
Right.
The latest addiction that we all now have is binge watching.
I was going to say e-cigarettes, but yeah, okay. Yeah.
Well, you can choose whichever one you want. But we all binge watch, and the thing that keeps us going is, of course, that essential hook that theatre always has, which is what's going to happen next.
Right.
And then we sit down with Game of Cards, and we think, how evil can this character be?
Game of Thrones, yeah.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
no, Game of House of Cards.
House of Cards.
And Game of Thrones. Yes.
But yet they should merge. That's a better.
That would be a wonderful idea. But we keep wanting to know what's going to happen next. And the element of and then is what holds us into it. And the theatre is full of that.
Right.
But the theatre is also a much more intimate form. So you can go into this darkened room with people who are, just coming off the street from their own lives, and then for a 90-minute or 2-hour period, you were transformed by people who are just like you, who are just sitting at tables talking to one another. All they do is talk to one another. That's one of my students once said to me that all they do is talk to each other. And I say yes, but isn't it? It's the best talk in the best order, and you feel as if you've shown up just at the best time for this to happen. Because if you'd shown up a minute earlier or 2 hours later, this wouldn't have gone on. And of course, that's the magic of theatre. And then it moves us emotionally as well as intellectually, so that essentially when you're in this sort of mystical space. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but there are the two elements that I go to for religion are English soccer and the theatre, right. and they are both transcendent spaces. They are moments when we can be more and better than our normal individual selves. We become this part of the greater whole.
That's right.
And I think people will always wish to have their better selves visited upon them. And I think as long as they do, the theatre is relevant.
Well said. Well, Bob Duxbury, playwright and professor. We'll be right back.
I wish I was in school.
If only I had a math test today.
Or a book report to give.
I wish I was in school.
I'll stay after class. I'll clean the chalkboard.
I'll do extra homework. I'll skip recess.
I wish I was in school.
I wish I was in school.
I really wish I was in school.
School ends, but free lunches for your kids don't have to. Find your local food bank at feedingamerica.org/summer meals for help. Together, we're feeding America.
We're with Bob Duxbury, playwright and professor locally here at Santa Rosa Junior College. We were just talking about the relevance of playwriting in the theater in general. But theater has always been a rich forum for political exploration, and I understand it's something you do in your work. You have used your work to explore political notions. Let's talk about that process and what that might impart upon your work creatively.
Well, I would say that it's not that one puts politics into one's work.
You don't just inject
political activity. It doesn't come with a syringe.
Right.
But I think that anyone who lives in the world and who is paying any attention at all must understand that power is a source of enormous import.
And that's what we're talking about ultimately, is power.
That's what politics is basically about, who has power and who hasn't.
Right.
And I think that had there been a big lobby for poor people or the powerless.
Right.
Just to be absolutely,
somehow it's always the same.
Absolutely,
right?
yes. You know, then I think that things would be very different. I mean,
Right.
if there was somebody saying, you know, you expect us to be homeless in these conditions, I mean, what, you know, but nobody's there. No, there's no voice for that. But of course, in the theatre, you can allow people to say things and to address issues. Oscar Wilde said that, you know, if this is how Queen Victoria treats her prisoners, she doesn't deserve to have any. You know, and I did confess to binge watching. So
Well, we all do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that the political element is lacking in many instances from contemporary American work. There's a play going on in Broadway at the moment about the reign of King Charles III, and using tabloid journalism and a living not even king yet. I mean, he's the heir apparent. That Alan Bennett said that being the Prince of Wales was not a position; it was a predicament. You know? And I think that the English are a lot less squeamish about really ripping into things and saying what's wrong, because I think all Englishmen believe that the value of your opinion should be, you know, shared.
Right, vociferously.
Exactly.
Yeah, we don't have that kind of discourse here. Now, and even during this election year, there seems to be a sort of, at best, it's a sideshow at
Yes.
this point. And,
Yes.
and we're, it seems like our audiences are interested in it for its entertainment value, not its political value or what can be gleaned and understood.
Absolutely.
What's happening, and how can playwriting fix that?
Well, first of all, I think that art makes nothing happen, you know, the
Okay.
old says, you know. But I think that one of the things we could address is, if we don't like what the Republican Convention is at the moment, why can't we imagine what we would like the Republican Convention to be, and to have that discussion, but have it on a stage now, so that we can actually then, hopefully, one would go and see the play and say, well, you know, boy, I really wish it was like this, rather than what it seems
Right.
to be. And I think that the notion of it would be very difficult for a playwright to invent Ben Carson and Donald Trump,
Right.
and have Califorino in there as well, and have 11 people standing on a stage and nothing much, you know,
But that's
being
a budgetary
solved.
issue, though. That many
Exactly,
actors, but yeah.
right. But nonetheless, you'd say, well, what would an ideal world look like? And I think that from Plato's Republic on, we've aspired to this ideal world, not because we particularly want or need to live in it, but we have to have something that we're aiming for.
Right.
Otherwise, it's sort of become the targets gets random. And I think that we need something that we say, let's move in this direction, and also let's have some kind of measure of how far short we have fallen.
Right.
And I think that at the moment, people have so little idea of where we might be, how great this country could be, how many opportunities we have missed, and unless somebody puts something out there to say, no, this is the marker, this is what we're shooting for, and this is unacceptable, this is not what it's supposed to be. And I know that sounds kind of like the teacher in me, of like, I'm expecting this, I'm expecting that, and, you know, you lot are really, you know.
I feel like I just failed. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. yes.
But you're saying that art you can model aspiration through art.
Absolutely.
But you said also earlier that art doesn't necessarily manifest change. I mean, that's a paraphrase. Am I correct?
Well, I mean, the thing is that there is a sin of commission and a sin of omission.
Okay.
And for the artist, I think the sin of omission is not to try. That it's not necessary that in your own lifetime you bring about this enormous improvement. But you should every day be getting up and trying to bring about that enormous improvement. Chekhov writes for imaginary instruments. Chekhov's plays were in no way suitable for the theatre he was writing at his own time.
Right.
It was only later that they invented something as a way of playing Chekhov that made sense that long after Chekhov was passed.
That's fascinating. Well, again, kind of harkening back to the posterity thing, plays are necessarily ephemeral. You know, they exist for the moment that they're on stage.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious why you didn't pursue screenwriting, for example.
I wrote the script for a Richard Brotigan movie.
Right.
And believe me, Richard Brotigan is like the worst person to try to write
Were
a
you
script
doing an
for.
adaptation of like Trout
I
Fishing?
did
or-
an adaptation of So the Wind Won't Blow It All Away.
That's great.
So,
That's great. Was it produced? I'm sorry,
yes,
I
it
don't
was.
know.
It was
Okay,
produced,
yeah.
and it was in one of the New York festivals.
Yeah.
Um,
Forgive my ignorance.
No,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
It was, but then this addresses the issue of. I mean, I would say this, Daedalus, is that there are any number of the likes of me out there with no real significant reputation. Nobody really, knows who you are. Fame and glory will pass us by, but that doesn't mean to say that what you did in your own time didn't, first of all, amuse yourself,
Right.
amuse your friends, and in the passing, Yeats, cast a cold eye on life and death horsemen pass by. And believe me, he will.
Is that a salvo for you? Like enjoying the work, in creating the work and sharing the work in your contemporary experience, if the notion that fame and fortune has passed you by, is that enough for you as a writer?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah. And I'm not. Obviously, you've had success. I mean,
yes,
yeah,
of course. I mean, and I've done better than the average bear.
Absolutely.
You know? I mean, but on the other hand, what would success look like? What would fame look like? I mean, I would get to come on something like this, and it would be Charlie Rose talking to me. You know?
I know.
But does it worry you that you're not Charlie Rose? I mean, don't you enjoy doing what you're doing in the moment? I mean,
indeed, yeah. And I've enjoyed this talk. I'm so glad, Bob, that you're here and to share your insights on art and theater. What's next for you?
I'm working on a play about Matthew Arnold at the moment.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So,
any?
I'm taking the poem Dover Beach, and I'm writing about the poem because I think that now we're in this sort of meta age where one text can inspire another text, and that's what I'm trying to play with. But I don't want to say too much about it because,
I understand.
Believe me.
So we're with Professor and Playwright Bob Duxbury. Thank you, sir, for coming. I really
Pleasure's
appreciate
mine.
taking the time. Yeah.